All right, so we are going to start on chapter 2, but before we do that, would any one of you lovely ladies start us off in prayer?
I will.
Okay, thank you.
God, bless our conversation as we look at ways that we can serve you best with our ministries to kids. Open our eyes to things that are time to change and things that are not time to change because you've put them in place, and not to just be swayed by something we hear that sounds great, but to really test it against your word and your will. Thank you for just the opportunity to work with other people who are seeking you and seeking your will as they work with kids. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Hannah. All right, so I was looking forward to this chapter because I feel like this was kind of my purpose in going to the Kids Matter conference a couple weeks ago, as I wanted to find out the hows, the whys on, really truly equipping parents and what is in the way that that's stopping us, or, where's the disconnect? So I was really looking forward to this chapter. So we'll start with question 1, which is on page 44. And it was, what are some ways those in the home and church can partner together to help ensure effective child discipleship practices? And how can your ministry initiate or be more intentional about these steps? So what do you guys think?
Well, I think that one way that we can partner with families is to figure out what it is that they need. I think we've been talking a lot here at our church about assuming the needs of the people. And so I actually did the study thing that came, assessment that came with the book. And I've started to get answers back. And I realized that teaching kids how to pray, even just in the few answers that we've gotten, teaching kids and families how to pray. And there was another one that was like super low. Our numbers were super low. And I thought, well, these are places, right, that we can help resource our families. Because I think too, a lot of times families are very confused. They don't have the words or the language to talk about their faith. And it's daunting to them because we're seen as the experts because the church pays us, or I'm in that role as a volunteer, or, whatever it is for your context. And reality, we're not that much more of an expert than them. So I just think asking them what they need and then figuring out how to resource them.
I've been struck a lot by my church recently, the need to disciple the parents, that like partnering together looks like discipling the parents. And for my specific ministry, I have a lot of parents that grew up in church, but the more I learn about the churches that they grew up, the more I see that there was like some pretty big missing pieces within their own like parent and child discipleship. And even a lot of them are coming from it's not like the different denominations that I'm like, oh, they didn't get everything they needed, but like I don't really know how to explain it, but I see that they're missing some major parts. They're not all necessarily new to the faith, but they're new to like kind of a personalized faith. And so really wanting to see the parents be discipled, I think is a big thing.
What I wrote down is very similar to what Jessica was saying, is talking together, talking to the parents to hear what they're struggling with or what their expectations are. Because I think a lot of times, like as the survey kind of showed, parents' expectations and Kidmin leader expectations are the complete opposite. So I think opening that line of communication to parents is really important. I also did the survey. It's been open for us for a couple weeks now. And at first I only had like 6 like individual parents respond. I wanted, both sets of parents to respond if they, if they could. And it wasn't until like I text every single parent, like, hey, take this. It's been really great to see what they think we're doing and what they think they should be doing. So it's been really interesting to see that now, just needing to take that info and build it from there.
I think in our area, there's a really big disconnect. Like my husband was raised in church, and so they're like, oh, well, it's just up to the church. And my husband can tell you all about Bible history and Bible stories, but the life application side of it, like, forget about it. Like that is not my department. And so if I need to know like the proper pronunciation of a place or a person, or, he's the guy. And I find that in our church, it's a lot of the same mentality. If you were raised in church, you know the stories, the big picture of the gospel, but the life application and the nitty gritty and the, this is how I pray through this. And this is how I go to war for, into battle and prayer over my kids and over my life and over the things that I'm struggling with. It's just like, God is just so far off that, that happened in the Bible, but that couldn't necessarily happen to me. And so just giving like the one-on-one application, or even helping parents understand that, you don't have to have like a big story like Jonah or like Noah. God can meet you in the midst of the everyday situations. And I think it's Christ in Youth, or is it 4, 5, 6? They have like the testimony cards where they're like, here's like the 5-step program on sharing your testimony. I shared those with our parents, and it really changed things for them. And then we give them one question every month. Hey, how did you learn that God is big, or how did you experience God's love? And that has really helped them to kind of step back and say, okay, here's how I've experienced God in my life, and here's how it's moved forward. And it actually started because when we were in COVID church, our pastor started this whole initiative of like, we're going to just talk about it and talk about our testimonies and what makes us a church family. And so I think that's a big part of it too, is helping parents realize, like, you might have been raised in church your whole life, but you do have a testimony, and that is the evidence of grace, the grace of God in your life, and helping them put words to the things that they've experienced and getting to know them in their stories, because then we can help them say, okay, that's how you take that to your everyday life. But that takes a lot of time.
I resonate that with like so big. I feel like I say this in every book group, is I feel like I grew up in church from like toddler, but I feel like I really didn't know God or Jesus or what the Bible truly meant until college, when someone like finally just started explaining us application. Like I could tell you every Bible story in the book, but it was like a light bulb went off in college. I'm like, man, I missed 20 years of this, of knowing God and Jesus on a deeper level. And it really broke my heart. So I think that is super important as kid leaders to make sure our kids get that, because kids are smart. They're not dumb. They can definitely understand it. Not that I think kids are dumb at any point in their life, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I just don't think we give ourselves even enough grace. I feel like as believers, we're so hard on ourselves and like, oh, I have to get this perfect before I can lead anybody else. And it's like, no, you just have to be one step ahead, and it's like, oh, you're not feeling good. I remember when I didn't feel good and I was at church and, my pastor prayed for me. Can I pray for you and see if, and let's just see if it works, it doesn't, I like just giving the freedom to like fall forward, step back up and, and just keep trying until you find something that works, because there's 12 learning styles and 12 teaching. Well, there's probably more teaching styles, but, so when you figure how, you have 4 kids, that I'm just speaking from experience here. I have 4 kids and they all 4 learn differently. I have to learn how to communicate the gospel to all 4 of them in a way that they get it. And so I think just even telling parents, like, just give yourself lots of grace, because you're learning how to be a parent and God is walking with you in this. And we're children's ministry leaders and God's still walking with us through this. And, like, we're experiencing all kinds of crazy. I'm babysitting and the little guy's writing my book. That's how my Monday is going. But I think that's a big part of it too. Just give yourself the grace to learn, give yourself the grace to mess up, give yourself the grace to allow God to walk you through that process.
I think one of the things that I've noticed as I'm parenting my own kids, and then helping other parents parent their kids, is that we, at least my peers, we've been taught from our parents, not for good or for bad, whatever, this is just how it happened, right? Like, that you have to have the answers. And if you don't have the answers, then you either just don't deal with it or you pretend that you have the answers. And I think that has been damaging for them, for my parents, because now they're having to rethink and reorganize and redo. And then I'm also thinking, okay, well, I don't have the answers. And it doesn't make me a weak person for not having that answer, but instead it allows a space for me to invite whoever it is that I'm talking to. Oops, sorry, got an email. Into that exploration too. And I think a lot of time parents are like, well, I don't know how to have the conversation about Jesus with my kid or about cell phones with my kid. And so I'll either just wait for somebody else to have that conversation, or I'm just not gonna do it. And I think that's where we get, that's where we get messy. And I think that's where stuff can happen. And I think, like you were saying, Jackie, letting families know that you can have the grace to not know. It's totally okay.
Yeah, we don't want them to stay uncomfortable. Like, don't pretend to research your stuff or seek out answers. And it's okay. You're not anything less because you don't know it. The only person that knows it all is Jesus. So I think that's really good. And at the conference, at the Kids Matter conference, they were talking about this in one of our classes, especially millennial parents. They really struggle with failure. They automatically feel like they're failing already. And they were talking about how hard it is to reach millennial parents. Like, you have to gain their trust and you have to show them things to prove what you're telling them is truth. I can't remember all the reasons why, but yeah, they say millennial parents are hard.
We are a very hard generation to understand. We suck.
It's true. It's true.
So much though. My goodness.
All right. Maybe that's what it is, right? Yeah. Like our kids are growing up in the digital age, but we were the ones that were smacked in the face with it. And I honestly think that, like, Reels and TikTok, and that's where all of these people are, right? I think that that's good. Like, I think that social media can be used for good, but I do think that because I think that we tend to go in pendulum swings, and there's so many parents out there that are on these media sites saying it's okay to be a failure, that even now some parents are like, well, it's okay. Meh, don't have to try too hard. Or they're like, we're getting mixed context. It sucks.
Yeah, there's no happy medium. It's one or the other. And if you're here, this group's wrong. And if you're here, this group's wrong. And there's no mixing or middle.
Just in this conversation, it's making me think, like, how cool would it be if we were able to set up like some kind of something within our churches to where it's like, hey, parents, you don't know the answer. Here's how we recommend you finding the answer, and modeling that for your kids. And so that way it's like, if you need help, go to your here's when you would go to your pastor. Here's when you would, call a friend, like, here's the who wants to be millionaire lifelines, like who wants to be a disciple of Jesus, right? And like, here's the lifelines that we have, and here's how we can walk through things in prayer, and here's the importance of fellowship, and how coming to church builds that trust and builds those relationships for those stinking millennial parents, and just to kind of help everybody find what that balance looks like and how to make God that person that provides that balance. Just as I'm processing what everybody's saying, because this is a really good week. And we're only on the first question. This is awesome, guys.
I think part of that conversation too, Jackie, has to be recognizing. So we are, my church was part of the United Methodist Church, and we have since disaffiliated. And so what we're finding is a bunch of people, not even just millennials, people in general, are finding it very hard to trust the church as an institution. And so I think that we as church workers and as people who attend church, we have to take responsibility that we really screwed some stuff up. And whatever that might be, whatever that might look like, because I think that that's part of why younger families are so hesitant to bring their children to church, because they're scared. They don't know what you're going to say. They don't know how, they don't know what's going to be, because the church has just got such a pretty nasty rap out there right now. And so I think that has to be part of the conversation. Like, look, I know we messed up, and we're sorry, and we're changing. Help us change.
One of the things they said at the conference too about that, like, again, I just keep referencing the millennials because that's what they did, is like, our trust issues, and how millennials don't even look at, like, so they'll look at a church website, right? See how, cool it looks or attention grabbing it is, and that helps in some of the decision, but like parents today aren't even looking at pastors or making their choices to stay at a church based on pastors. They're making it more based on what are the reviews, what are people saying about that church, because we can talk about ourselves as much as we want. We're great, we're this, we're that, but they fully rely on reviews of their peers as their guidance to attending a church or not. And also, like, children's ministry was number 2. So it was reviews are number 1. What are people really saying about it? And then, what is the kid ministry about? So that was another really cool thing.
Do you remember what workshop that was? I have MegaCon to go, and I'm feeling like that needs to be the first one that I'm on.
It's really good. It was on day 1 or day 2. It was one of the Wonder-filled ones. It was in the big room. That group, whoever it was, I'll look through my notes and I'll let you know. But that one, I wrote down so much stuff because it was so good. And I sat at a table with a bunch of older ladies, and they're like, "You resonate with this?" I'm like, "Yes." Like, this is so me. I don't listen to the pastor. I go look and see what people are saying about it. And they're like, "Oh, we debate it, or we base everything on what the pastor says." I'm like, "Not me." I'm like, I want to make sure that people are saying that it's a great place to go to. Because anybody can lie on a website, and they're like, "You wouldn't believe what they wrote." No. So it was just really cool too, to have that conversation with them, seeing, generational differences and whatnot. But
It's almost like a restaurant, right? Like, my husband and I went to New York, and I was like, "Oh, look, let's go to this restaurant." And he's like, "You can't trust everything that, 1, the restaurant says, and 2, that the people say." But yeah, we look at reviews rather than their websites. When we looked at the website for the price, but that's about it.
oh, all right. Well, let's move on to question 2, because that was a long question 1, but that was a good one. Number 2, are there breakdowns in communication between leaders and volunteers, parents or guardians of the kids? And what areas could you initiate or improve communication? If you guys don't mind, I'm going to start on this one, because this one is kind of big for me, and I'm trying to figure out how to fix it. It's not, I don't know. Like, I communicate with my volunteers often. I communicate what they're learning, what we're going to pray for this week, things going on in our ministry. Like, I'm a good communicator to them, but I feel like my volunteers then lack the confidence to communicate to parents at pickup time. For example, if I'm in a room, in a small group, like if I'm volunteering, when parents come to pick up, I'm like, hey, Susie had a great time today. Susie, tell mom what we learned about her. And I'll prompt asking questions. And hey, this is our challenge for next week. Like, I'm all in. Whereas my volunteers, I feel like they get super intimidated, or they're just kind of like, here's their paper, see you next week. Like, I feel like there's a major disconnect there. And I think it's crucial, because the volunteers handing off the kid to the parent is the moment where they're communicating what they can do this week or what we learned about. And I mean, I don't expect them to have, a full on 10-minute conversation with them, but hitting those bullet points real quick, I feel like is a struggle for my team.
I would agree with that. Same.
Yeah, I wrote, I think that there's a lack of communication. I think that you can have a lack of communication in everything that you do. But one of the things, so we use Grow Kids for our Wednesday and Sunday children's church. And one of the things that they have in there is a small group leader and parent breakfast that I've not figured out. We've been using it for 2 years, and I've never been able to figure out how to use it in our context quite yet, because we have so much overlap. But when I read this question, I was like, okay, maybe this is time for us to figure it out, because I think some of that disconnect is that our volunteers don't really know our parents. And so like our ones that attend both Sunday and Wednesday night, they know, and they're not afraid to have a conversation with them. But those who just come on Wednesday, or those who just come on Sunday, our volunteers are like nervous around them. And so maybe people are often less nervous when there's food involved. And it's sometimes easier for people to talk when there's food involved. So I thought, I'm going to put this on my little brainstorm list to figure out how can we fix this, and how can we make that point of contact work better? Because you're right. That's when you can make it or break it for some families.
I definitely think that communication is one of my weakest spaces right now. Like reading through this question, like, are there any breakdowns? Like, yes, there's tons. I feel like we're a relatively small church, and I feel like I ask my volunteers to do so much that sometimes I get like overwhelmed at the thought of like asking them to do more. And I know that's like not correct, that like, communicating with them and talking with them would give them more confidence and more energy to do that. But like anytime I think of like asking them to pretty much do anything, and they're not being rude, it's kind of unfounded. It's more on me than it is on them, of like just being so nervous that like the next thing I push, they're going to be like, this is too much. I volunteered to do like this, and you've already asked me to do more than that, because like if I don't ask them to do more, like we can't do anything. Like I have to start shutting down classes if I don't. And so I don't really know, like, I don't know what to do, to be honest, about improving conversation. I feel like I have really great conversation and connections, more so with parents. I feel like I need to strengthen my communication with my volunteers. I end up talking to parents a lot because of what all my ministry holds for me.
I've been there before. And one thing that really was a game changer for us is when you communicate the vision or mission of your ministry to your volunteers, it should like captivate them and give them like a passion or desire to help. Now, obviously we all have our limits and we want to be respectful of limits, but when you are like constantly putting it out there, and I think people will capture it, they'll want to do more. They'll want to help you as much as they can. And, people can always say no too. I mean, that'll be the worst thing, is they say, nope, I'm good. But I've got volunteers who volunteer in multiple things, and it just took me asking them, which is nerve-wracking because I'm not very good at delegating. I'm like, okay, I'll just do it all myself. But then you're overwhelming yourself, which isn't healthy for you. And, just like Jesus did, Jesus couldn't do all the work. He had 12 disciples that he had to recruit and train. So I think that's a good thing to think about is, don't think of it as an ask. Think of it as you are communicating this passion and desire you have for your kids. And this is the mission of your ministry. And you want people to capture that part, not as here's another volunteer job. No, come serve at kids ministry. We are changing lives,
Thank you.
And I think part of that too is when you find like, okay, if, I need somebody to do like birthday cards or, whatever. And it's like, okay, here's like the giftings that would be really good in this area. And then you say, hey, I have an opportunity for you to serve, where if you love administrative gifts, or if you love doing like calligraphy, or if you love acts of service, this is a really great ministry for you. And then as they're pouring out and they're pouring into children's ministry, they're also being filled up because we're utilizing their gifts, talents, and abilities for the kingdom. And so I started delegating based off of gifts, and I will leave spaces open. And it's like, this is a hole that we have in our ministry, and every volunteer sees that hole. But it's like, we are praying and believing that God is going to fill it based off of the gifts, talents, abilities of the people. And, I don't care if there's a hole, and I don't care if there's a gap, we need, and there are times where I'll even have students like 4th, 5th, and 6th graders fill in those ministry roles as well. And it has really changed. I haven't had a volunteer step down in 5 years. And how often does that happen? Right. And so that's another idea just to consider too, is like, what love language is this utilizing? What gifts is this utilizing? And can I find somebody to fill that? So that way it's not an ask, it's I get to do this for the kingdom, from a have to get to mindset.
I think we have found a question to ask the author when we meet here in a couple weeks is the how do we encourage our small group leaders or volunteers to communicate to parents? I think that's a good one to ask. I think your idea about the breakfast is really cool too. I think that's a good way to help build confidence in our leaders and the relationships, which I think are vital too. It's hard to talk to someone if you don't know them well. But I think that's a good question to ask Matt at the end. Unless anyone watching this video at a later time has ideas on how to help that, drop it in the comments below. But anyone have any other thoughts on this question before we move on to number 3?
Well, Jody, you were talking about, casting vision and the importance of casting vision. And, if we make, like, okay, millennials are going to read the reviews. So I'm like combining questions 1 and 2 here. If we, in my mind, pickup is going to be what makes the review, right? For children's ministry, because they're not with the kids. So either a drop off or pickup is going to be what parents talk about when they talk about our church. And so I think if we were to cast vision to our people and say, hey, when people go online and they leave a review about our church, what kind of impression do we want to leave them with? Because this is our last chance, especially with first-time visitors, and kind of see where they're at as far as the buy-in, as far as the vision and mission of our specific branch of ministry of the church.
That's good. I'm writing that down. All right. Well, then the next one is, how is your ministry equipped to disciple kids on principles of the Christian faith, including the basics of doctrine and blah, 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 all those examples they listed. So how is your ministry equipped to disciple kids on those principles?
I think our ministry is pretty well equipped in the doctrines and the basics of faith, mostly because of our volunteers. Our volunteers are older and they've been in faith and working in children's ministry or youth ministry in some aspect for most of their adult life. I think where we're lacking is how to take it from how an adult understands it and help our kids understand it. And I realize that that's part of my job, right? Like I shouldn't expect my volunteers to just be able to do it. Although if they're going to be in the small group room with a kid, then they need to have some basic understanding of that. And finding ways to put those into our meeting times, either scheduled or even organically. Because that's one of the things in the reviews or in the survey that we've been getting back, is that people don't think that our ministry is doing enough in the whole and like incorporating the gospel in everything we do, which is eye-opening for me, because I'm like, oh, of course we are, but then I'm also not the kid or the family, right? Like, so I see it in a different light than they do. So I think that we're lacking in just figuring out how to actually apply these things that we know.
Yeah, I was surprised. The survey results, some parents noting on our thing that we don't open our Bibles to read and we don't pray in groups. I'm like, what? But I'm like, well, they're not in there to see it. And am I communicating that? So, which I'm not. But in my mind, I'm always like, well, why do I have to communicate that? Why don't they think we're, but I'm like, that's obviously important that I need to do that so that they see we are doing those things. With our curriculum, we clearly state almost weekly, like the authenticity of God's word. Like, this is the Bible. It is God's word. This is what it does. So I feel like we hit that really strong. Same with like the gospel. Because every week, each story, no matter what Bible story we're doing, it points back or connects to Jesus and the gospel message. And, because of the story, like we talked about Isaiah this week, and people turning away from God and worshiping idols, and it talked about repentance, and it talked about God forgiving them and loving them. So I mean, they always connect somehow each week, which is wonderful. But as I was reading this, I'm like, do we ever talk about the role of the church? Like, yes, we talk about the gospel. Yes, we talk about prayer and opening our Bibles. But like, I don't think any of my kids would know what is the role of the church. Like, and obviously that's important. So I feel like what I would like, and maybe I haven't come across it yet, is like, what are like the subcategories under discipleship? You know what I mean? And seeing that and being able to look at that and go, okay, so how can I make my kids stronger in these areas? And build our Sunday mornings off of that, or build my resource wall for my parents off of that to equip them for discipleship, because I don't want my kids to be part of that 64% that leaves the church. I want them to know the why of their faith, to be strong in it.
So we switched to a discipleship model about 4 years ago. And so every month we have 3 Bible stories that all talk about one topic. And we share all 3 Bible stories every single week, which seems like a lot, but it's really not. Because we do it super fast. And so we take all 3 of those and we filter it through. This is what it looks like in the gospel, as far as God made it, we broke it, Jesus fixed it, now we have a new life in him. And then from there, we spend a lot of time with the kids talking about our life verse. It's our memory verse. And how do we build our life on this? And how do we translate this from the New King James, which is what our entire church uses, into what we call the Life Kids version? So what does this look like to us? How does it feel to us? How do we take it to our go zones, which are all of the places where God sends us? How do we talk about this to our target list? How do we see God at work in our life in this? And it's extremely conversational. And we moved our kids to where we have preschool through 12-year-olds, like all in one classroom. And then once one classroom is full, then we move to the next one. And our 4th, 5th, and 6th graders are leading the service, and they're leading worship. So they are learning what ministry looks like, what it feels like. And then when they graduate out of kids church and go into 6th grade is like a crossover year. So they're still serving in children's ministry, getting all of the ministry training while they're able to go to youth group. And then once they're in 7th grade, they can serve as student leaders in big church. And so, just as far as like, this is what ministry looks like, this is what it feels like, this is how I'm going to build spiritual disciplines, this is my mission for the week, this is my action plan, this is how I'm going to pray and see God and see how he's at work in our life. And so then we started incorporating big church and giving the adults opportunity to record their 5-point testimonies, and we shared those in class, and just trying to make it more of like a bridging the gap, and we're all one big happy family together, even if we're not all in the same room. And it has changed our church culture, and it has changed our kids, and our kids come to church excited, and they come to church just really eager to serve and learn. And and they're they come to church and they're like, I played with Johnny next door, and we talked to Johnny about Jesus and how God has a plan for him. And and it's amazing to see, because I never thought that would be a reality. But when we started getting really intentional about, this is what we want to see, and this is what we're going to have to do to get to that point, it has really changed things for us.
Do you have, Jackie, that discipleship model written down somewhere? Or is this just like an understanding that you have with your staff?
So it's actually a curriculum that we are currently in the process of publishing.
Okay.
So here at any point in time, I should be getting the final link from our web developer and getting all of that going, just because
Awesome.
it's spreading like wildfire just within our denomination.
I would love to see it. I would love to see it when it's done.
Okay. Text, or I guess give me your email address in the comments or something, and then I will email it to you. So yeah, and it's gonna have like a portal with like all of the training of how to incorporate all of it, because it's a major shift and it's a different mindset. So I'm going through and I'm breaking down, like, here's how I did this, and here's how, different ways that we tried it and how it could work in a variety of different situations, because I'm aware that what God does in my church is different than what he wants to do in all of your guys' churches. And so here's a number of different ways to do that.
I'm excited for that for you, Jackie. I think that sounds really, really awesome, and something I think a lot of churches are looking for. So, all right. Any other thoughts about how your ministry is equipped to disciple kids?
I'm curious what what do you guys consider the definition of discipling kids? When I hear the word disciple, like my brain automatically fills in like a one-to-one example of like, you have like a discipler, like that kind of thing. But then like hearing your answers to questions, it doesn't necessarily seem like that's maybe the definition that you guys are working from. So I'm just like, I'm curious about that.
I'll go first. My discipleship, with one-on-one, like I think that too, but that's more with my adults. We can call it coaching at our church. We coach one another. But with my kids, discipleship is, I feel like it's teaching them what God expects them to be or to do, and knowing the why. I think that's the biggest thing about discipleship, because again, you can teach kids to be kind, you can teach kids to be respectful, but discipleship is knowing the why behind it, so that whenever questioned themselves, they'd be able to explain it. So our focus is in our large group setting. I do it with a large group of kids. It's kindergarten through fourth grade, but then kids break into small groups after our large group. So then our small group leaders can dive deeper in discussion questions or activities, the same thing. So by the end of our 1 hour service, our kids have heard it in large group, they've heard it in a smaller group setting. So they're getting it over and over and over. Obviously one-on-one would be awesome, but then I think you also lose the relationship factor. And relationship in like a group setting, like small group, it's kids all the same age and their leader, and kids being able to talk freely in front of each other and, oh, I relate to that, oh, I did that, I think that's really crucial. One-on-one is good, but I think that's better for adults versus kids. Kids need that camaraderie, kids need that relatability, because one-on-one, I think they would shut down, like they wouldn't share much or talk much. But that's also my church and my kids around here. Maybe kids are different in different areas, but that's how my kids are up here.
I think that discipleship in general is just, it's a process of becoming more like Christ, right? Like, so Jesus had disciples, and I heard this story, and I'm probably going to get it wrong because my brain is super foggy right now. But I heard this story about Jesus and his disciples, and the point for any rabbi who had disciples, because every rabbi had disciples, not just Jesus. I also think we forget that too, that he was a rabbi. And what they did was they would follow their teacher, their rabbi, so closely that the dust that they were kicking up would fall onto them, so that they saw that as becoming like him in that way. And so I think of discipleship in that way, right? Like I want to be so close to Jesus that I'm picking up his dust that is falling off of him as he's walking. And I think that when you're translating that into children's ministry, it naturally becomes the little things, right? Like Bible stories, how to pray, how to read your Bible, how, like the little check boxes that you can click off, so that they have the tools and the good base to then, not that they can't, but then right now, but that they can dive deeper the older and the more mature they become. Because I don't think a preschooler is going to understand, obviously, the same thing that a fifth grader is going to understand. But I think in preschool, they need to have a fundamental space so that they can dive deeper each year, so that by the time they're an adult, they could stand alone. They don't, if they were between churches or if they were moving, they could continue to grow in their faith without a church.
So my idea of discipleship is giving kids the things that they need to be able to stand on their own and have an answer for their faith. And so there are things that we do in a little bit of a one-on-one setting. That's what happens when we invite the adults to talk to the kids about what they've learned, just because there's a lot more adults than there are kids at that point. And all of the kids have their favorite grownups that they always like to go to. Sorry, I'm babysitting. Did I mention that? But all of the things that we do to help kids stand in their faith, to understand their faith, and to be able to see God at work and to make God tangible to them falls under discipleship. So most of what we do falls in a group setting, because we do have kids, preschool through age 12. And we do that specifically so that way the younger kids can look to the older kids and see, this is what the end goal looks like for me, and this is what ministry looks like for me. And they get really excited. Yeah, they get really excited about being able to serve and being able to have a ministry and being able to do all of those things. And so just knowing this is the goal, this is the end result, and these are the steps that we need to take to get them to that point would all fall under discipleship. And I think sometimes that looks like teaching them how to look up scriptures on their own. Other times that's teaching them modeling prayer and then releasing them to be able to do it on their own eventually. So it's like, here's the 3-step process of, we're going to do it, we're going to walk beside you, then we're going to release you to do it. A lot like how Jesus did the disciples. So and I mean, there were times when Josh Denhart, he has this really amazing course on leading volunteers. And he's like, Jesus had the 12, but then he had the 3, and then he had the 1. And so discipleship, what he did for the 12, he did for all 12, but then he had a group of 3, and that group of 3 got the next level of discipleship. And then he had the 1, which was John, and how, and him and John had a very special relationship. So I think discipleship is going to look different based on where the different kids are at, because all kids come in as the 12. When they're 4th and 5th graders, they're part of the 3, and then our 6th graders are part of the 1. And I didn't even make that connection that I even modeled it that way until I got to think about Josh Denhart. But anyway, that's discipleship to us. All right.
Kind of like the pyramid scheme, but without the scheme.
Well, it depends on who you talk to, because if you're not Christian, then it's definitely a scheme.
Right. Sorry, I've had so many bad jokes today. I'm totally in mom mode. Mom jokes, dad jokes, whatever. Oh, all right. I was looking forward to the next question because I want to hear from you guys especially, but what resources inside and outside the church could strengthen the quality, creativity, and theology of discipleship in your congregation? And go.
I think groups like this, where you can get outside ideas and resources from people who are in a different social group than what you're in, because I think a lot of times it's really easy to get sucked into our own world and like, this is what we're dealing with. And then the second that someone from the outside comes in, it's like, oh, wait a second, now we don't know what to do because we cater to this box. And so I think the more that you can fellowship with people in different geographical locations or whatever, it allows you to keep an open mind of like, okay, when that family with special needs comes, or when that family that's never been to church before, or when that family that were at one point in time involved with witchcraft, when they come, we know how we want to adapt and deal with those things, because you're constantly exposing yourself to what other ministry leaders are doing to deal with those kinds of issues that you may not have to deal with yet.
So one thing I've been planning on for over a year, and I just haven't done it, but I'm challenging myself to get it done here by Christmas, is creating a parent resource wall. The most difficult thing I find, though, there's tons of resources out there. Obviously making sure whatever you do aligns with your faith. Because there are some things, I mean, especially when it comes to discipleship or like main ideas of what your church believes, obviously there may be some differences. But I've had this sketch in my book for like a year of how I want it to be. I don't know if you can see it, but this is like my parent resource wall, what it could be. I'm trying to get some lighting. I don't know, but it's 3 shelves of books. I was going to post like this week's lesson. I wanted a prayer calendar, prayer prompts, because prayer is my focus. I figured like if I could start parents praying with their kids and kids seeing that model, because I've said to our kids before, how do you become better friends with someone? And they're like, oh, by talking to them or texting them, right? And so I'll say to them, well, that's the same way it works with God. If you want to know God better, if you want him to become, your better friend or stronger relationship, you've got to talk to him. And it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So I really am wanting prayer to be our focus. And then I want to put a prayer wall, a prayer wall where kids and parents can leave prayer requests. And either myself or my team, I've got a couple ladies who love to pray, but I can pass that along to them. And so this wall will not just be like a parent thing. It's going to be a kid thing, a prayer team thing. Like it's connected in many different ways, not just limiting itself to the kids ministry, but provide opportunities for different people to participate. But that is my hope and goal, and I just need to do it. But I get nervous because then I'm like, oh, is this book right? Is this a good one? Is this what my family's looking for? And I just need to get over the nervousness of it all and just do it. Because I think it's important, because there are so many times, I don't know answers, and I would love to find something to help me get answers. But anyways, that is my hope, and hopefully a resource for parents.
I also have big dreams of creating a family resource wall, but you're a bit more ambitious than I am by, setting the Christmas goal. But I think one thing too that we could do is because we live in such a digital world, is if we could partner with our pastors or our web developers and just say, here's a list of online resources, and help parents figure out how to put the shortcut on their phone. So then that way, when they're stuck and they're in the middle of having to deal with it, like they can pull it up and they can see like a YouTube video of how to talk to your kids about whatever. And then it's all logged, and then it's in alphabetical order even. And, because I know for me, I'm going to go to my phone before I go, drive down to the church, but that's like a 40-minute drive for us. So but then that way it would be something to where everybody can contribute in like a way, as far as like emailing, like, here's a link that I found that really helped us, and then have somebody to screen it and then post it. Like that's like a whole nother ministry for bookworms, which would be awesome.
Kristen shared hers last week. If you haven't seen it, it's on our group page. She shared her online resource wall, and I went on there. She had some great stuff. I can't remember if it's, alphabetical order or anything. I want to say it's some type of order, but she had a really good online resource wall.
I haven't read it yet. I haven't even read the first chapter. I saw your thing, like, we're getting online in 40 minutes. I was like, oh wait, that's today. It's Monday. And yeah, I've been catching up on sleep since MegaCon. So I will get on that at some point in time this week.
I think my biggest struggle with so we have a bulletin board that we will be making our parent resource wall, but I'm a lot like you, Jody, and that like I want to make sure that the stuff that we're giving our parents is good stuff. And I am finding that it is extremely hard for me to find time to screen these things, right? But at some point I just have to like put it there. I just have to do it. But I'm also thinking, well, okay, like, are there people in our church that do love to read? Could they read these? And could I say, these are the parameters that I would like for this? And then do you think it fits? And then I'm not having to vet everything, but I don't know. I also think, oh man, I had another one and it's gone now. This is what happens when you don't write things down. So never mind.
Well, if you remember, interrupt.
So I homeschool, and we don't necessarily use this curriculum, but I love their train of thought and their process. But it's called Classical Conversations, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's like a Christian-based curriculum. And their whole thing is that, when kids hit 5th and 6th grade, they're at this point to where they're starting to wrestle, and they're starting to compare notes with like, here's what mom and dad have taught me. Here's what the world has taught me. Which one of these things am I going to own? And they actually have an entire reading list for preteens that says like, okay, here's the Christian worldview perspective, and here's a worldview perspective. And then it gives the parents conversation points on, here's how you can read them with your kids, and here's how you can have a structured like conversation with your kids to help them like really solidify their worldview in biblical principles. So that might be something too, is to start looking into different homeschool resources, because they're, again, there's a lot of them, and they're pretty forward about like, here's the kinds of questions that you're going to be having, because if you're raised in church like my husband, like, the whole idea of like having to talk about like puberty and all of that like really freaks them out with our kids. To where with me, it's like, I wasn't raised in church, and if we don't give them those guardrails now in our home, then the world's going to give them no guardrails, and it's just going to be a free for all, and that doesn't end well for anyone. So that might be something worth looking into, as far as, you know, just even thinking outside of like, you know, here's how we can resource you and all of these different crazy things, because it said outside the church. So, and me not being raised in church, it's like, I find that a lot of my Christian friends, their parents were so set on like, this is the only way, and they didn't allow any outside influences that need to be filtered, to where they didn't have any filter. And then they got into high school and it was a heyday. And they're not serving at all. And so I think there's definitely a balance in like, you know, removing that shelter a little bit, just so that way our kids can see and understand there are consequences to sin, and there are consequences to not living out God's way. And there is a reason for us to do this. And they provide a lot of really amazing resources to help you find that balance.
Thinking about resources, like outside the church, a huge portion of our kids receive outside resources, such as like mental health therapy. A lot of the kids require that for a variety of reasons. And I want those resources to strengthen, like, do you guys have any thoughts or opinions on how to partner with those outside? So like, some of our kids have like social workers, some because DHS has been involved, some because they've been homeless and living in shelters, and the schools they attend provide them with caseworkers to help them deal with that stuff. A huge portion of them have therapists. One of our kids is currently in inpatient stuff. And so like, I don't always know how to use those resources to strengthen their like walk with God. Like, it's not like I default get access to those therapists, and some of the parents, the parenting is what's led to that. So it's not like they're like super open-handed. You know, there are plenty of families whose kids require therapy, and you're like, you know, sometimes you're like, I can't see, the parent seems like they're doing everything right. And sometimes you're like, well, I could have seen this coming type situation. And so very private parents who aren't willing to necessarily open up about those stuff. So I don't know. Do you guys have any advice? I feel like I'm asking for a lot of advice instead of answering the questions.
No, that's fine. I think it's going to be difficult for you to make a relationship personally with these like therapists and workers, because their job is obviously to protect the child. Not that you want to hurt them, but they're protecting them and as an individual and protecting their information. So I think from that aspect, it may be difficult, but what I would maybe work on is making relationships with those resources, as like when you have families come maybe that are looking for help, looking for mental help, looking for therapists. Hey, I've got this list. I know Susie at behavioral health would be able to help you, or I know John at DHS would be able to help you with food or with housing. I think making community partnerships would be really good, because over time then you're going to build a relationship with them and them with you, and I think you might see fruit out of that. It'll take time, but I think that would be a good first step, is just partnering with them as a whole, not on child specific, if that makes sense.
So we have several families that are foster families, adoptive families, and then several kids that have just gone through traumatic experiences. And just yesterday we had a kid that is an adopted child. She's adopted by her aunt and uncle. She's had trauma. She had a meltdown, and I'm able to help with those things. And I know how to handle those situations, but because I was the only teacher in the room, I couldn't do it to the best of my abilities. And a conversation that I was having with a social worker that works in our coffee shop at the church, she was saying, you know, we need to have more training on how to be trauma informed. And so just today, I've started researching ways that we can help our volunteers even be more trauma informed, because I'm finding that while I might have some really great techniques and I can help my volunteers have these techniques, it's really hard for their brains to process it because they're older and trauma wasn't a thing back then. It was just, push through it. And that's not the case anymore. And we're recognizing that we need to be open to that. And so I think doing some groundwork and asking these questions in this kind of a group setting, right, like, is super helpful. But then even just looking at it as a whole, like, how can our ministry feel more safe for these kids? Because at the end of the day, we want them to feel safe and loved. Because I think that's how those two things, if those needs aren't being met, then nothing else is going to matter that we do.
We had training for kids with special needs. We had a lady in our church who owns a center that she works with all different types of kids with special needs and helping them create routine and structure and becoming independent. That's the ultimate goal. But she came in and showed us things we could do. We got crash pads in our room for kids when they're having meltdowns. So having things ready for them on hand. So I think training that's another really great option. I mean, I don't know if you have autism centers around you or mental health places that provide training for volunteers or employees, but that would probably be a really good thing to do too, just for you or for your whole team.
I've also been recently getting involved in this, so I joined a little late, sorry. And the terminology trauma informed that you use, Jessica, like if you Google that, most states actually have a group that provides free training on that topic specifically. And that's how I got connected with those same people you're talking about. So I went to an open meeting on it, and now I'm connected with the ARC locally, with DHS, with the county resources that are separate from the state resources. So that trauma-informed training is probably something to check in your community.
I'm signed up for a training coming up in November. That's TBRI, trust-based relational intervention. And so I'm hoping to meet some people there and just get some information there too.
And another thing that you could consider doing is allowing your church to go into those places. So if you were to go to like a mental health facility and say, is there something that we can do to partner with you when it comes to helping kids feel loved? And they might say, well, like whether it's for Christmas, can we bring some kind like a, Operation Christmas Child type box or something? Can we, going to the schools, and how can we be involved here? So then that way, when people come to them looking for resources, they already have that relationship with you, and there's a trust with you, going back to those dang millennials, and just helping to build that bridge and that communication and that trust. So then that way they know, like, this is a church that we know and we can advocate for, and we can send them to these programs or whatever else, and and give the hope of salvation, because I mean, Jesus is the answer for everything, right? And so I think that would give other people the opportunity to pour back into you to pour back into them, and to have a good working relationship with your community as well.
Josh Denhart actually said at the training, I went to his radical community outreach, and he said, you have good works with your community. Good works build goodwill or trust, and that goodwill then gives you the opportunity to share the good news. So it's a building, a relational building thing. I think you could have a lot of potentially really good opportunities with that, for that. All right, well, we are going to end here. We didn't get to our last question, but that's okay. But remember, If you have any other questions, you can always drop them in the comments. We can keep the conversation going. We also have our meeting with Matt, the author, in like 2 weeks, or I don't know, I don't have my calendar in front of me somewhere. Sometime soon we're going to meet with him. But I truly enjoyed this session again, took so many amazing notes. I love this book group. I've learned so much from you guys, and I can't wait to see what we have for next week. Would anyone be interested in closing in prayer? I'll close us in prayer then. Father God, I thank you for this opportunity, Lord, to talk. I thank you for the technology to make it possible. I lift up each lady we have here, each leader. Lord, you've called them to this position for a reason. And God, I pray that whatever questions they may have, whatever doubts they may have, that they are just encouraged. They just get ideas and things from you, from your word, that helps them in whatever spot they are in. God, I pray for the kids in all these ministries represented here, that they are growing in your word. They're coming to know you in a personal way, God, and we rejoice in every soul that is called upon you to be saved. And God, I pray that we kind of just follow this model Jesus gave us of discipling our kids and making more and better little followers, God, so that they do the same. They're bold in sharing the gospel with their friends. Lord, I just thank you so much for this calling you've given us. Be with us for the rest of this day and rest of this week. And Lord, help us in preparation for our midweek programs or Sunday. In your name we pray. Amen. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining me, and I will see you next Monday.